Welcome, Sheesha family, to this week's AMA, where we share exclusive insights into some of the most promising crypto projects around, including key information about the team's vision, major milestones, and path to success. This week, we are speaking with Bartr. So Bartr is revolutionizing the telecommunications industry. Through aggregating telecoms data on-chain, Bartr solves a key problem in one of the world's largest and most established business sectors. We're joined here today by Paul Henderson, founder of Bartr, to help us get a better and deeper look into the project's ambitious plans. Make sure you stick around as well until the end, where we'll be asking some questions from the community that were asked beforehand and live Q&A. Firstly, Paul, how are you today?
Very well, thanks. Pleasure to be on the AMA today. Thanks, Sheesha.
Fantastic. So we'll dive straight in. Interested to hear more, obviously, about Bartr, and where better to start than with you. It'd be great if you could tell us a bit more around your experience and what brought you into crypto. I'm sure you've got a solid understanding, well, I know you've got a solid understanding of blockchain and most certainly telecoms. So it'd be good to know how you've merged these two industries together and a bit more around how yourself and the team are a great fit for this venture.
Sure. So I actually trained to be a lawyer originally, so sort of in a very traditional, professional, not very fast-moving industry, and I moved into finance, banking, and investment. And one of the companies that approached me to work with them was a blockchain fund that was due to launch back in 2012-13. So I was already personally involved in crypto. I was fascinated by the white paper of Bitcoin, read that, and started getting involved personally around about 2011-12, and then worked with this fund that was set up to invest in basically on and off ramp companies that were setting up to work in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And that required me to really do a deep dive into what DLT and blockchain was capable of as a solution, and also, I think, importantly, what it wasn't. And from there, around about the same time, not long afterwards, another client approached me and said, look, we're running a telecoms business. We're looking to restructure and raise capital. This is what we're doing. And I was fascinated to find out how backward, really, the industry is and how analog it is. I spent a whole year doing a deep dive into telecoms because I couldn't actually believe what I was finding every day as I was doing more and more research. But the opportunity was huge. So I decided, actually, I was so enthralled by the opportunity that I decided to join that particular client at the time and refound his business as a co-founder. And then we ran that as a wholesale telecoms business. Basically, for those who don't know that even wholesale telecoms exists, that's essentially a landscape of several thousand businesses around the world buying and selling access to telecoms networks for voice and data transmissions and SMSs globally. It's a very opaque market. It's very fragmented, and so it's hard to really get a solid estimate on what that value of that market, that part of the telecoms landscape is. But estimates range from anywhere between $100 and $250 billion every year. And bearing in mind that the telecoms industry overall has a revenue of about $2 trillion every year. So yeah, and we ran this company together for 4 years, and what I realized was that these opportunities were, even bigger than I thought. But one of the major barriers to realizing new and better solutions was that the systems being used to manage these networks hadn't really changed fundamentally for 30 years. And they were all based around the idea that any business that was using them was a service provider and not a trading business. And my background in financial markets really gave me the insight to look at this as a trading, commodity utility trading landscape first and foremost. So I took my experience with the blockchain fund and the understanding that I gained from that experience and running this company for 4 years, and I decided to leave and start Bartr Technologies back in 2017. So I think, and for the rest of the team, that there's a deep telecoms understanding and expertise, but on the engineering side, there's a lot of expertise that comes from other large global landscapes and sectors that aren't necessarily fundamentally based on telecoms or have a telecoms engineering background in terms of the team. But it allows us all to come at this, and has allowed us all to come at this with a blank sheet of paper. So I think oftentimes when you see, a paradigm shift and a real novel innovation being brought into a particular sector, it comes from those that aren't tied to the legacy ideas and the legacy technologies and systems. So collectively, I think with that collective background, that has put us in a very strong position to come up with a new and better solution for a lot of the hard and persistent problems that are faced by telecoms network operators and their users still to this day.
Amazing. And I mean, I say this every time, the team for any business, and especially moving into Web3 as well, is fundamental. So having that experience, both from a blockchain standpoint and also the Web2 experience in the telecoms industry, like something that I really, really want to pay attention to and draw out, because it's ultimately what will drive the success of the business. Great background as well. I mean, funnily enough, I actually studied law, not quite got to your level, and qualified and moved into banking as well. So we followed a similar path into Web3. The other part I want to draw out is it is such a convoluted industry, and we'll dive into this during this conversation, but simplifying this and adding transparency and really trying to drive benefit to the end user is really at the core of Bartr. You touched on a few things about it being opaque and quite complex in the background. And it's clear, another point you've mentioned, is clear that the technologies being used are outdated, from manually updating customers' contracts to entering credits and storing all of the cool data on these centralized databases for each independent service provider, which you've mentioned there are thousands of. And there's no easy access to this. How exactly does Bartr aim to improve the technical and operational efficiency for telecoms companies using blockchain?
As with all answers to questions about telecoms, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is standardizing and automating every single workflow data format necessary for the telecoms networks operations to function. And in terms of engineering and network speak, we're looking at what's referred to as layer 8. Now, interestingly, telecoms runs on protocols like, many of, but particularly telecoms runs on essentially free to use technical protocols, so that, you've got all sorts of, it includes the internet and traditional voice and SMS. And the industry is very used to using standards and to automation when it comes to the technical layer, transport and network, etc. When it comes to where all the value happens, it's captured, where the network operator's business touches the customer and transacts all of that value and bills them and reconciles. There's very little standardization globally in that space, which leads to the fragmentation and the inefficiency and the opaque nature that I talked about before. And it also leads to, unbelievably, and this was from a report back in 2016, so it's probably a lot more than this number since then, going to uncollected revenue, theft and fraud alone. And there's obviously a huge other number of ways that revenue can seep out and value can be lost. The industry is about $300 billion every year, which I think is just insane when you think about it. There's very few other industries that could afford to lose that money and still, continue. So I'll give you the long answer is that if you understand that, you understand that there's these very fragmented standards and systems and siloed databases essentially being communicating information that is often there's lots of errors in, reconcile where all this value is being captured and who needs to pay who and what payments have been made and what services have been consumed, etc. If you then look at, well, that's gotten that way over many decades. You know, when telecoms first started, there was mechanical switches, there was people in. We've all seen the clips on the black and white movies from the 1930s where there's usually women sat in a room plugging different wires into different sockets. And what's happened is, because the industry's just built on top of that, the digitalization of it, as much as it's been, has sort of mimicked that old analog world, if you like. So when we're coming in with a blank sheet approach, we can apply first principles thinking, and we look at the state of telecoms today fundamentally. So it's a network of networks, and it's very simple but not easy to operate. So that you've got the transceivers that receive and transmit wireless or wired transmissions. You've got the copper, the fiber, either terrestrial or subsea. Unlike what most people would understand, very little of this still, although we've got OneWeb and Starlink coming along, is handled by a satellite. So most of the telecoms transmissions globally are handled still terrestrially, either wirelessly or wired. So you look at that and you say, right, we've got a simple network layer, transport layer, but a very complex layer 8 on how we're managing and recording all of this and reconciling this. So let's try and match the simplicity of the transport layer and the network layer with a system that manages all the valuable layers as well. And what occurred to us coming to this with a blank sheet approach and with first principles thinking is something that is inherently distributed and inherently digital and has problems. We should be looking at an inherently distributed and inherently digital solution. And DLT based novel innovations, including smart contracts and DAOs and DACs and various different forms of data structuring like Hashgraph and blockchain, seem to be an ideal fit for that. So that's where we came at it from. And by doing that, you've basically cut a lot of dead wood complexity, unnecessary waste out of that. So you've got a much more simplified, distributed, secure transactional layer 8. And then from there, what you can do, because you've got the associated novel innovations like smart contracts, which because of there was a great article written by one of the partners, I think, at A16Z several months ago that in terms of smart contracts, the innovation is the composability. What we mean by that, we can set rules and standards within the contracts, which is where my background in the legal profession really helped. And as long as we have a library of set standard contract terms and reference points, we can then automate those and they can be linked to each other. We can link them to form a more complex entity, abstract entity within the system, like a DAO or a DAC. And they can all automatically talk to each other based within that system of rules that you can set. So that is hugely powerful. So the composability of smart contracts allows you to then automate pretty much anything and everything, which leads to huge inefficiency savings and a huge increase in security. It's all being recorded on the ledger and it's all auditable and immutable. And then you've also got that ability that standardization allows you to automate and then scale with the composability as well. So in terms of the Bartr solution, that's what we've done. We've basically looked to simplify it, taking first principles and a blank sheet approach and using all the tools of novel innovation that we have in the box, and the most appropriate that we see is those novel innovations around and including DLT and smart contracts.
Definitely, a lot to digest there. It's great to hear the history too, and you're obviously very well versed in this space. With regard, just for the listeners and myself actually, not as technical in the telecom space, you referenced layer 8. What are these different layers and how do they play a part in the industry, and how is that solution? I know you've touched on security and it being transparent and a few other bits and pieces. How does Bartr then revolutionize that element, which seems to be key?
The layer 8 I'm referring to is So in the software engineering industry, in the sysadmin industry, it's sort of a running joke that layer 8 is the politics layer. It's where all the value, where all the problems come from, where users hit the standardized world of abstracted models for technical and hardware and software engineering. So it comes from the OSI model, which is an abstraction model which engineers use to talk about and segment out the different functions within a network. So you've got the first layer, the primary layer is the physical layer at the bottom, then you've got the data link layer, network layer, transport layer at number 4, session layer at number 5, presentation layer at number 6, and then at the top, application layer. And you'll notice that none of that makes really, it talks about the application layer, it refers to humans, but it doesn't talk about what, it refers to them in as much as they interact with the applications. But then you've got this missing layer, layer 8, which is where all of the good stuff happens, where all the value is, where all the transactional data is, and where people actually interact from a human being standpoint. So that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about layer 8. And because it lacks standardization is leading to all of these problems and issues. Now, what DLT did when it came on the scene and the related novel innovations is it turned what the industry started to talk about as a thin protocol, fat protocol model upside down. So right now you've got in terms of where value lives and is transacted, so you've got the old Web 2 model, which is the thin protocol, which is all the things I've just described, where the technology interacts, software and hardware, how that's standardized and controlled. And then you've got the fat protocol, which is layer 8, which is not standard. So what blockchain has enabled and the industry started to talk about is to flip that upside down and have all the technology fully integrated and converged with a Web3 view of it. So the user is at the center of all of this. So right now, the user is basically an endpoint that consumes connectivity services in terms of telecoms and pays money for doing that. There's no real bilateral or multilateral on a peer-to-peer level interaction happening. What Web3 enables with DLT at the core is to flip that round. So the user becomes, and it is enabled to derive value from their participation individually and collectively as an organization through manifestation of instantiation of a DAO or a DAC or another collaborative organization that's abstracted into the digital world of the telecoms landscape. And it also allows users to create their own networks by, again, abstracting away and representing digital resources, if you like, including themselves, into a standardized environment, which is the Bartr solution.
Perfect. It's very technical for sure, but you've broken that down in a very simple way for my understanding, for sure. You've touched on a lot of the relationship side being B2B and partnerships at an enterprise level. For the layperson, the normal regular user, what we care about, I suppose, is how does this impact us? Can we still, even through using this blockchain technology, call each other directly, like the regular calls we have? What kind of implications does this have from a cost perspective for us too? It'd be great to just dive into that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, there's sort of a short or immediate term answer, a medium-term answer, and a long-term answer, which is like the 100-year plan. Hopefully not 100 years, but in terms of relative to the different time periods how far we're looking out from where we are now. So ultimately, our vision is that the Bartr solution and the ecosystem that matures and evolves around it, which will require the participation and input of the community at large, becomes the operating system for the way the world connects. And it's not a big stretch of imagination to imagine that. So you look at the user data on what different browsers have dominated over the years and how rapidly that changes. At one point everybody was using Internet Explorer, and then all of a sudden Google came on the scene, and we've got Firefox now. We've got lots, but it can happen that a huge portion of the retail user base, will prefer and use, for a variety of different reasons, one particular solution. So that's our long-term vision. Our long-term vision also includes that the retail user is not only a consumer, but a participant and a contributor. So, and that brings me to sort of the short-term view of what we're building, which is the layer A tokens that we're offering for subscription right now. They're like if you would imagine going back to the hardware world of the 1970s and 1980s, it's got basic functionality, but it's like a blank motherboard. So like Computer Club, you used to get the motherboard and you'd build, or you put more memory on it, or you'd put certain transceivers into it, or other capacities and capabilities, depending on how you wanted to use that within a finite range of potential capabilities. So one of those, the first use case that we're looking to ship on is the ability for retail users to stake the industry, essentially, stake particularly the wholesale sector. So the wholesale sector I talked about in my first answer, there's about probably, it's hard to estimate, but 5,000 to 6,000 businesses that all they do is buy and sell access to networks, so that your call or your SMS or your data transmission gets from where you are on your network, your subscribed user, wherever you are in the world, China Mobile, Ross Telecom, Zain, BT, Vodafone, AT&T, etc., wherever you are in the world, to where you want it to go on the other side of the world. Now, that industry is very cash constrained, but it can, because it's so fragmented and it's so inefficient, there's huge returns on being able to find the difference between what customers who are sending you the transmissions and voice data and SMS are willing to pay per unit, per SMS per minute, per megabyte, and what you can find it for sale at somewhere in the world. But they because of the nature of what they're trading and buying and selling, it's very hard for them to access, large amounts of capital. So by bringing a staking LP solution into this, and we'd look to ship this within the first 6 to 9 months after closing the current token round, then retail users for the first time can participate and derive value by getting income and staking rewards by actually providing a fundamental required function within the existing telecoms ecosystem. So the returns you're looking at is sort of 5% plus at least. That's how inefficient and fragmented the landscape is. And remember, it's probably over 100 billion, probably closer to 250 billion in terms of actual liquidity and value every year. That's the first medium, short-term functionality and features that we're looking to ship for NFT holders.
I'm not sure, Paul, if you cut out there. Were there any others you wanted to build on in terms of utility? I mean, saving money, cost savings, and being able to trade is phenomenal, especially in such a, like I said, convoluted space where there are so many actors involved, and it's quite hard to get this information. Was there anything else you wanted to draw out in terms of use case and how you can bring these benefits both to the B2B relationships and end user?
Yeah, so standardization and fixing the plumbing of telecoms isn't sexy. We understand that, but standardization is enormously powerful. There's a great, and this is relevant to the end users. There's a great example that was given. There was a great article in The Economist several years ago, and it talked about the unsung hero of the shipping container, of all things. And before the shipping container came along, they used to pack ships by hand. So you have all these strangely shaped packages, and they fit them in like a Meccano puzzle, which made things very, very inefficient and very costly. Within 2 years of the shipping container becoming a standard model, a standard metric for shipping goods around the world, the cost of insurance plummeted, the volume of trade went through the roof, an order of magnitude increased. The cost of that trade went down, and the number of shipping container ports and jumping off points and companies that were using shipping containers just increased exponentially. Now, why is that important to the end user? Because right now, the telecom landscape is very much tipped in favor of the telecoms company. Now, it's by its historical structure and nature. there's no what we call elasticity of demand. So using telecoms, telecom services are essentially a human right. There's actually a lot of countries that have been debating whether to include that as one of the basic human rights of people in the digital age in the 21st century. But you don't really, if all of your telecoms provider options in your particular country are all going to put their prices up by 5%, then what do you do? And that's because the telecom model, from a regulatory standpoint, from a financial investment standpoint, structurally network, everything is all based on national borders and regional borders in the US and other large countries. Now, if we can save the telecoms industry, if we can bring huge efficiency savings, and we've talked about the 300 billion lost to uncollected revenue theft and fraud, which we think we can make a huge dent in, at least 50%. And then you look at the amount of revenue every year that is then used by the telecom sector as a whole is spent on operations and marketing and managing that layer 8 for all those layer 8 functions, which is about 40% of its revenue, which is about another $400 billion. Well, more than that. We think we can make a big dent in that. So what does that do for you? Well, if we get the level of critical mass adoption that we're looking to in our long-term vision, our 100-year plan, then we could essentially offer free, affordable services on a borderless, secure basis through our intermediating platform of the operating system and the way the world connects for free. So that's huge, and it's not just huge. I mean, it's huge for me. You know, we all in the developed world, if you like, our phone bills are running to $50 to $100 per month just for cell service with some data. The effect that has in the emerging world that's still developing is huge. So if you think, you know, $100 represents, you know, 5% of your disposable income every month, what do you think it represents of a country with a GDP of less than $1,000 a year or $5,000 a year? It's huge. And the telecoms and IT sectors are one of the highest multipliers in terms of whether it comes through investment, direct capital investment, or whether it comes through reduction in cost of those services. The effect that has on economies in general is massive. So for the average user, it's hard to overstate the benefits and positive effects of doing all of these things, fixing the plumbing for telecoms worldwide.
Incredible. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Something that just stuck out to me is it's not a sexy business, but more often than not, simplification and the non-sexy solutions are always best in any case. And ultimately, it's an important factor of all of our lives, right? Being able to contact each other and speak to each other. And the sexy part comes at the end, which is more cash in my pocket for all of the stakeholders you're dealing with. So there's definitely
earning by being part of the network as well, by staking, exactly. By, you know, ultimately we're looking at, you know, enabling mesh network capabilities through the operating system. So you can extend the edge of the network. You know, Amazon's already doing it in a centralized way. I think the project's called Sidewalk or Pavement, where it's devices that you have in your home are all enabled to share your Wi-Fi with those that are close to you through a Bluetooth, LoRa Bluetooth signal. So it's already happening, and I think to have it truly globally, you know, globally deployed and accepted, it has to happen in a distributed, shared way, and in that sort of platform. Look at, you talked about the boring part, but look at Stripe, for example. You know, Stripe did fixed payments and online payments and clearing and everything else, right? It just did what PayPal was doing, which was already the behemoth incumbent, and now it's worth, well, it's worth about 100 billion, and it's not even gone public yet. So yes, Absolutely. It's not sexy, but Absolutely. It's hugely powerful.
Exactly, and I think that's the key part, and ultimately, from a layperson's perspective, in any case, I'll be frank, I don't care what's happening behind the scenes. I just want to see the end result. And that's what you guys are delivering, right? The powerful part is being done by Bartr, and then the end result is the part that we will all care about, which is important. The other element you touched on, Paul, is around the different countries that this will be deployed in. How are you approaching this? Where do you want to be? How is Bartr going to market? Are there any jurisdictions that you're going to focus on first of all? And ultimately, in the longer term, is this going to be a global thing? It sounds like from what you said, yes, but it'd be great to hear a bit more detail there.
Absolutely. You know, I've mentioned how fragmented and regionalized and localized a lot of the existing Web 2 solutions are for this and the networks underlying. This is a global first. Yes, it has more potential impact in the shorter term for emerging economies where connectivity services are less, there's less number of users that are able to access them, and even when they are, they're relatively more expensive. But yeah, this is in line with connectivity, and like you said, the real magic is being able to communicate with people you care about, be that for business or for personal, in a secure and reliable way that doesn't cost you the earth. It has to be a global, you know, talking is global, communication is a very human basic thing. So it is a global plan. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, I think we've got a very unique structure in the way that our business divisions work and our divisions and focus areas are. So we've deliberately have Bartr Connect in the group. So that's essentially a wholesale business. And that's connecting to all of these, as many as possible of all of these different wholesale companies that are doing this network access trading, but also in the longer term, sooner rather than later, directly to what we call tier one networks, the names in telecoms that everybody knows because they're probably a subscribed user for the cell service or for the fixed home service. So we get to deploy and give access to a lot of the innovation that is all the good stuff that's happening on the back end, without making people have to change things like completely. So the UX UI there, as we start to deploy and ship there, will look like what they're used to, but they'll realize very quickly that their service from a wholesale level is much better, much cheaper. There's much more pricing available. They're getting paid faster, and there's no disputes, etc. That gives us an in. It's like a little back door. And then obviously the community at large, we want to bottom up. We want to incentivize our users to subscribe to the layer A tokens, which is the primitive digital artifact in our long-term ecosystem, and get them involved and ultimately build ship features and functionality where that actually is possible to make that part of the telecoms and connectivity experience rather, beyond the first use case of staking. So by a top-down and a bottom-up approach, we're looking at sort of a pincer movement attack from a military standpoint, dropping in behind the lines, and then killing them with kindness in a lot of ways, showing them that this is a much better way to do things. And ultimately, the old way will gradually, step out of the picture, and the Bartr solution and other solutions, hopefully, that are being built in the distributed Web3 ecosystem will flourish.
Fantastic. And I think a key point here is everything will look and feel exactly the same, and we've mentioned this a few times, but you're dealing with the back end part and really trying to standardize and bring efficiency to that element. We've touched on aggregating call data on the blockchain, which improves efficiency of the complex ecosystem of data tracking that we have right now. And we've also spoken about how partnerships on the B2B level are super important to Bartr. Does this put all existing telecom providers at a disadvantage for using the Web2 infrastructure? And it'd be interesting to hear a bit more around those that get left behind, and also how it potentially changes competition in the space, and how you fit into that as Bartr.
Yeah, so there's a great project I spoke to the founder of yesterday. He's a wonderful guy. He's as passionate as I am about all of this that we've been talking about, based over in Australia. It's called Passionate About BOSS, and they keep a thing called the Blue Book, and it tells you how many. So there's two groups that you're talking about here. We've got telecom network owners and operators, and then those that are also telecom network owners and operators, but rent their hardware from them, if you like. We call them tier ones and tier twos, or MVNOs, mobile virtual network operators. They're the telecoms actors in the market that everybody can relate to. Then you've got a whole other landscape that most people will not. Well, some of the names you'll recognize, like Ericsson Network Services, Tata Communication Services, SAP, Amdocs, etc., that sell the systems that we call business and operation support systems, or BOSS for short, that allow the telecoms network owners and operators and those that lease from them to manage their networks accordingly, and their customer service and their resource management, etc. So the telecoms networks themselves, this is great. This is absolutely fantastic for them. In a world of increasingly reducing margins for them in their traditional voice business because of things like Skype and WhatsApp and others like it, and Viber and Zoom and et cetera, anything that can help them give a better service, retain customers, reduce churn, increase their bottom line without having to spend to increase their top line is good news for them. It's in terms of our approach to the vended-in solution Web 2 market, there's been a lot of good work done by several of the main players. That they are testing and they are getting into the solutions. And we're not going in as we're not going in to say to telecoms customers of these vendors, that these systems vendors, that you have to take everything out and just put our system in. That's exactly the opposite. Again, I'll refer to the idea, the approach that Stripe took versus PayPal. And we're looking to be, certainly for the largest vendors of these systems, to be interoperable by design, and to ship with SDK support and API support as standard for those that provide the largest percentage of the vended-in solutions. There's probably a handful, 10 to 20, but in total there's about 500 worldwide. So you can see that there's enough need and necessity for very specific solutions that deal with very specific parts of the problem in the market already. And I think that by taking the approach that we're taking, by partnering up with existing Web 2 vendors and going through channel partners, I think we'll get great adoption for the sort of gaps that the Web 3 solution can fill that the Web 2 solutions can't. And in terms of the actual market size, we talked about telecoms being a $2 trillion market every year in terms of annual revenue. The BOSS system is already bigger than things like accounting solutions, cloud accounting solutions worldwide. It's already bigger than ERPs, enterprise resource planning systems worldwide. And the latest Bloomberg article has it within the end of the decade, it's going to be over $130 billion market. So there's lots of room for lots of new entrants that complement, not just compete with what's already out there.
Sure, and you've touched on something really important. There is room, but also from my perspective, and given where I'm sat, I haven't seen a lot of solutions like this. So you're quite unique to I suppose, get ahead of the curve and be the first player in the space, or one of the first players in the space to do this. And there's a big pie for everyone to take a piece of as well, for sure. Paul, something else I wanted to talk to. We've spoken about security, and I guess a component of that could be privacy. Is providing telecom services on blockchain better or worse for privacy, considering the data ledger is public?
One of the biggest dirty secrets we've got in the industry in telecoms is that there is no such thing as privacy, technical security at all. It is quite frightening and shocking, actually, how insecure not just from a customer data perspective is, but the networks in general. It's because it's very chaotic. There's very few standards, and yeah, it's a real worry and a real problem. But I think using DLT. So the first thing to mention is that our system's not looking to capture any user data. We're interested in device information and network resource information, because that's what allows us to deliver our service in the most optimal way. I struggle to think of a thing other than carrying around pieces of paper in your pocket and leaving them in a bar where you've written down all the customer's information and all the call data, the network data, something that could be more insecure than what we've got right now. I don't want to frighten anybody, but we've seen the data leaks, and if you dig into the technical aspects.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, no, DLT-based management system, BOSS system is much, by an order of magnitude, much more secure than what we've got right
now. Perfect. I think that will I don't know if that puts everyone's mind at ease or not, until you guys provide that solution. And there's a few things for us to think about, for sure. Thanks a lot. Lastly, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about any key milestones or what's on your roadmap, maybe when you're going to launch, so on and so forth. So pretty much just an open floor for you to let listeners know.
I saw some questions come through on some of the social media channels. Yusuf, do you have any of them in front of you? Maybe we could just answer some of them that we haven't already covered.
No, I have those. I have a few of those in front of me as well. So, is there anything, I suppose, from a roadmap side or the tech side at all? And some of those are in the questions actually, so we can dive into those if you prefer.
Yeah, so roadmaps, obviously, to get the token issued in the hands of users, layer A NFT is first on there, and then provide native wallet support. We're working on Hedera Hashgraph in the first instance. We do see on the roadmap, building on other solutions as well, but there's been a lot of excellent work done on cross-chain compatibility on the L2. Composable Finance are doing some great work, and Polkadot have already done a lot of the heavy lifting there. So yeah, we're starting on Hedera. We think Deutsche Telekom and Tata, for example, and IBM are all governing council members, so they've obviously thrown their hat in a lot. And it's really suitable for global high volume throughput, need for fast certainty and finality, and low transaction fees. So, launching the token on Hedera is number one, and native wallet support thereafter. We've alluded to bringing use case functionality, shipping that as soon as possible within the bounds of the engineering roadmap, and we're working in an agile sprint structure. So we're going to be shipping small features that provide a lot of value to the user base over short sprint periods, rather than trying to ship something massive and take ages to do it. So the first thing we'll be looking to do the GDEX version, first version of the GDEX, which will include LP staking, which allows some basic staking and rewards to bring liquidity into the wholesale space. And that'll then include also the application of Rainman, which is our matching engine, if you like, to use a financial markets trading analogy. So lots of good stuff coming down the roadmap, and that's all within the first 12 months post-launch. So that's what I'd want to highlight. I could speak about the instantiation of the DAOs, and then the child DAOs, and user instantiated DAOs, and setting up the governance roles through community engagement. But I don't want to go off too far into the future. But that's all the good stuff coming down the line in the medium term as well.
No, that's good. That's good to hear about some of the big milestones you've got in the shorter to medium term, and I mean that will keep evolving and iterating over time as well. I know. So thanks a lot, Paul. And you touched on the community questions. We actually had quite a few coming through across the social channels. Albez, our marketing executive here, has picked a few questions from Twitter. First of all, to ask, and we have a few people here in the chat who can ask some questions live as well. So Albez, do you want to just get a few questions from the community ahead of time first of all?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Yusuf. As you mentioned, we have selected some prearranged questions coming from our Twitter community. So the first one comes from CZ_Arif. He's asking, there are two tokens within the Bartr ecosystem, namely the Layer A token and the Layer X token. Can you basically explain a little bit on the utilities for each token? And maybe perhaps here you can touch on the Bartr liquidity pools as well for that.
Yeah, so the Layer A token is one we're issuing at the moment, and that is sort of the primitive, if you like, the prime token that gives exposure to the ecosystem that we're going to, in time as we go down the roadmap, mature and build out and add more functionality and features to, and more native child tokens and DAO. Sorry, the Layer X is a transactional token, so the big differences between the two. The Layer A is a finite supply. It's a 5 billion total supply. Why 5 billion? It's plus or minus looking at the number of smartphones, for example, in existence around the world. Why is it an NFT? Because every personalized computer transceiver, i.e. a smartphone, is unique. So we're looking to start on that basis, and then we'll see how the token ecosystem evolves over time. But that's a finite supply, and each one is unique because each user and holder of them collectively, if they hold a lot, or individually, if they just hold one, can add functionality and features onto that can be personalized and used for particular resource provision within the ecosystem, within the network landscape. So Layer X is a fungible transactional token, which is of a variable supply. Now, we won't see until we get the parts of the system along the roadmap running live, and we start to see how users and transmissions are behaving within the ecosystem. Layer A, you can it's in the roadmap that you can be able to sell it. The public market, the free market will set that. The private markets will set that, and it will be available to be able to be sold and bought on various exchanges around the world, as well as a GDEX. It can be staked, and other features and functionality to be added over time. Layer X will only have a value against Layer A, and the volume, and there'll be an earn and burn governance feature on that. So it will expand and contract with the amount of activity that's happening within the Bartr ecosystem as it represents the subscribers of it and the users of it, be they telecoms network operators or be they subscribed users on an individual basis. That's the high level of the difference between the two.
Perfect. Thanks a lot there, Paul. Also, you did touch on the security within telecommunications itself, but one of our members from Twitter, namely RGM_500, is actually asking around the security within the Bartr platform. So he's asking, do you have any restrictions or requirements before they can use your platform, KYC, for example, or any other of that sort?
So it's not with regards to GDEX, which I presume is the questions related to that. In terms of general user, it's not envisioned that there's any major KYC or AML. In terms of the GDEX, they may be, but we'll evolve that as we start to build it out and test the beta. But in general, I personally and the team in general mostly share the viewpoint is that the surveillance first mentality of Web2 telecoms is not something we're looking to bring into Web3. So the watchword for us is personal privacy wherever we look to touch users' information within the ecosystem. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yep, that answers the question indeed. Thanks, Paul. And lastly, from our Twitter community, we have pieces, and you also did mention around Bartr DAO and the way it's structured and is building, but he's asking if you can kindly state more around how exactly is it structured, any features that it will include. Is basically really like to know more about the DAO at Bartr World.
Yeah, so the Bartr DAO is on the roadmap. The vision sees Bartr DAO being the sort of top of the chain in the hierarchy as the primitive DAO of a as yet unknown number of child DAOs that could represent anything. So they could represent companies that consume connectivity service. They could represent community DAOs for local connectivity once we add in the features and functionality of being able to instantiate a mesh network between smartphone holders and other devices. But the primitive DAO is sort of how best to describe it. The best I've seen this done is two projects, and I know people. It's a bit of a Marmite subject. You either love or you hate them, perhaps. And it's more in the creative world. But you've got the Yuga Labs, Bored Ape Yacht Club, and all the different things that came through that, the derivative NFTs and other structures, but also Punk's Comics. I think they've done a fantastic job where you've had the initial digital NFT features, and then they had these link them to as yet when they first issued as yet unknown DAOs like planetary DAOs, etc. So that's how I see, but more, I suppose, going back to the boring thing, more representing and mapping the use cases of the users that are consuming the services and how they group themselves, be they, in traditional Web 2 sense of locally and regionally, or in a sense of a corporate organization that has linked itself together and created a DAO for its entire company that's in lots of different countries around the world and lots of different locations. That's the current thinking. But you'll see more evolve and be announced as we start to mature the roadmap and start to shift.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Paul. I think that concludes all the questions from our Twitter community. Yusuf, should we go ahead with the members? I see we have a few more questions here within our Telegram chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy for you to jump into some of those questions there. I can see a few popping up.
Yeah, for sure. And also, as a reminder for everyone who's participating here, thank you for everyone who's asking questions within our Telegram chat. You can also raise your hand, and I'll give you access to your mic if that's your preferred way. So there's a question coming from Sadim. He's asking, what are the benefits to network creators if the service isn't serving a lot of people? Would it be more like proof of work or proof of stake, or a bit of both?
That's a good question. So we've as we've been building since intellectually building since 2017 and practically building since 2019, we've often talked about this as a proof of X or proof of N to look at securing this in terms of a consensus. So as it stands, the current thinking is it's a proof of stake. So you would stake your NFTs much like the LP staking. In terms of the DAOs initially, the Layer A DAO being linked to the Bartr DAO when it comes onto the roadmap and it goes live. There's also, arguments to be made, and I think it's still something that we're looking at from a technical standpoint, is proof of routing. So what you want to do, and this is particularly interesting when you look at the problems of fraud, is you want to not just believe somebody that says they've done something within the network. You want proof of it in a way that is immutable and provable, and you can reach consensus on that fact. So proof of routing is something that we're still looking at from a technical and just general high-level perspective. So it would be proof of stake and proof of X, which currently the conversations in-house are proof of routing. And how do we ship that in reality?
Thanks again, Paul. I hope that answers Sadim's question there. We also have a question from one of our regular community members, Chimchamp, and thanks again, Chimchamp, for participating. He's asking what would be the cost implications on average for those who would want to basically start a network.
So there's a reference point, I think, with an interesting sort of hardware-centric, but with the DLT element project, which wasn't the first as it happens. There was another one not long before it or just after it called Amber, where you were required to purchase particular types of hardware. The one I'm thinking of is Helium right now, with a LoRa transceiver. That's not envisioned in our roadmap. So that kind of hardware cost is certainly nowhere near that level. In terms of, so we're looking at virtualized networks and we're looking at abstractions through digital assets. So it would be the cost of the NFTs themselves and then the staking of them. So it will be by an order of magnitude much lower than, if I've guessed correctly, anything that the current Web3 type or Web3 targeted telecoms based networks and mesh network user participation models that are out there.
Thanks, Paul. And interesting you mentioned Helium there. One of our other members, Crypto Carrots, is asking how does this compare to Helium or Poland network? And what he's trying to ask is if people can or would be able to mine your tokens.
We're not in the short term, sort of next 12 months, we're not looking at any mining functions. We're looking at more like proof of stake to prove asset contribution to the resource, the virtualized network within the system at a resource level. So be that bandwidth, storage, etc., compute. I wouldn't rule it out, but not in the first 12 months post launch. How does it compare to Pollen? Pollen's very focused on mobile. I think it's a very interesting project. In fact, I think the idea of releasing the token first and then introducing the DAO, I think, is a very sensible thing from their roadmap. Helium, again, it's a hardware solution, and I know that it's captured the attention of some of the big players in the industry, particularly A16Z. But again, I think, so to answer the direct question, no, not in the first 12 months. We're not looking at any mining within the Bartr solution, but wouldn't rule it out. How does it compare to pollen and helium? There's no hardware requirement. There's no mining. It's a global solution first, and I know pollen have really focused on the US market, given where they're located predominantly. And but I think it's important to say, I think one of the big differences for me with Web3 is that it is, without sounding too naive, I've been around the houses a long time, and telecoms is a cutthroat world. I think there is much more room for, and a much greater, from a game theory perspective, incentive for those of us that are in the space of trying to solve telecoms problems and deliver things like mesh networks and user rewards into participation within a network that isn't controlled by the centralized operator, to work together collaboratively. So when I see things, the success of certainly, success in terms of user adoption and subscriptions, etc., with Pollen, with Dent, with some of the early players like Dent and Amber and Helium, I celebrate them, and I think it's great to see that. So I think I don't want to do too much duplication. I think there's too much of that going on in Web2 world for vended-in solutions for network management. I think going back to one of the points I first raised, and the chain interoperability in particular, the composability of smart contracts and the standardization they require to scale gives us a huge opportunity as Web3 telecoms focused solutions to work together and be interoperable. So great projects that you've mentioned, not seeing any expectation of mining in our solution in the first 12 months, but I wouldn't rule it out.
Yep, for sure. Thanks a lot. I think that directly answers the question to Crypto Carrots. And then we have actually one of our own, Jakub, who is the community lead. He's asking, when users create networks, how will these networks communicate cross-border? Will it require the internet, for example, or is it going to ride on a brand new protocol similar to TCP or IP?
So, right now, as we've discussed on the OS in the outside, the transport layer and the application layer, there's already well-established of transport protocols, TCP, IP, SIGTRAN, SS7 in telecom, specifically with IP telephony. We're not looking to, at this stage, replace or possibly improve upon, but certainly not replace any established standards in terms of transport protocols. We will simply be capturing the event sourcing, the events that occur within the network, which will be provided by the network events from those protocols operations, and then standardizing it into the layer 8 that I described at the beginning of the call. So we're not looking to replace that. There are some, and the name of the project escapes me, but there are one or two extremely smart teams specifically focusing on a actual brand new infrastructure. RENA project of John Day was one of the founders of the modern internet, along with Tim Burton. He's got for those of you who geek out on this stuff, he's got a fantastic book that's out that I forget the long technical name of, but I'm working my way through it at the moment. And there was another smart team that we spoke to a few months ago that are also looking at improving upon, or if not replacing, TCP/IP and other transport protocols within the system. So yeah, we're looking to build on what's there and do it in a better way, in a cleaner, more elegant way, leaving out anything we don't need. And we're watching RENA closely. I do like RENA personally as a project, and there's one or two others that are doing some good work as well. And we would look to keep an eye on that and incorporate it where it made sense for the Bartr solution.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Paul. Jakub, I hope that answers your question there. I believe Paul was very thorough on that. And lastly, I believe we have a question from Al, which is one of our community moderators as well. And I know you have touched on these points, but perhaps to emphasize more and as a wrap up as well, she's asking, what are the underlying values of Bartr's airtime or packets other than call, text, and surfing the web?
I think it's important to just reiterate that first principles, fundamental blank sheet. Telecoms transmissions are simply energy waves or energy pulses through transport medium, be that wireless or wired. You mentioned packets, and that's IP telephony, voice over IP. There's an article out there by somebody who was an analyst in the industry that wrote about packets and trying to convey the understanding to the general public that telecoms is probably the only industry on the planet that doesn't have a standardized unit of account, a valuable exchange and accounting for what it actually provides. You'll probably see it in whatever country you're based in. There's a big obsession with speed, but nobody really tells you about what you're actually measuring and what accounts for what and what it's worth, other than what you pay for it every month. So the packets themselves are not yet valued. There's no unit of account. It's our hope that the layer X and layer A and the interaction between the two, with their interaction through the GX with the public market, with the private market, free market, will set a value for the first time ever in the history of telecoms that is set by the public market by buyers and sellers. And then I'll be able to give you an answer to that question. But right now, there's not really an answer from the industry or from us that I can point to that would make sense.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Paul, and thanks, Albert, for fielding those questions as well. There are one or two more, Paul. I'm happy for you, obviously, to jump in the chat there and speak with the community too. Albert will be sharing some information on Bartr after this, and we'll be doing a kind of wrap-up that we share across our socials too in the coming weeks. So, Paul, thanks a lot. Extremely insightful, some technical knowledge there, the simplification of that to help us all understand it too, which is key. Really enjoyed this AMA, and I hope I can speak for everyone else here as well to say it's super insightful. So thanks a lot. Obviously, we'll be working closely to ensure Bartr do great things, and we're confident of that. And have a fantastic day. Like I said,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks for the questions. Appreciate it. Bye.
Amazing. Thanks a lot. And thanks to everyone who's attended today and joined in and participated. Have an amazing day. Take care.